Compassion and accountability. These two words get talked about in business, often discussed as kind of like opposites, or at least not very compatible. Today, we will convince you that they can go together, that it matters greatly to bring them together, and most importantly, how to do it. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you're listening to this podcast, you could have been with us live, or you could be for future episodes on your favorite social media channel. You can do that. You can get information about how to do that by joining our LinkedIn or Facebook groups. Just go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that. And then you can join in the conversation, and then you can get this information sooner, adding to we could call it your competitive advantage, if you will. Today's episode is brought to you by our latest book, The Long Distance Team, Designing a Team for Everyone's Success. You can learn more, get links to order a copy, get a excerpt, sample part of a chapter, all by going to longdistanceteambook.com. That's longdistanceteambook.com. Hope you'll do that. And now, without further ado, I will bring in our guest. His name is Nate Regier. He's been with me before. I'll say more about that in a second. But Nate is, I'm happy to call him a friend, and I want to introduce him, and we'll get started. Nate Regier, PhD, is the CEO and founder of Next Element Consulting, a global leadership consulting and training firm, helping build cultures of compassionate accountability. There's that phrase again. Dr. Regier is a former practicing psychologist and expert in social emotional intelligence, interpersonal communication, conflict skills, and leadership. He's a sought after keynote speaker, recognized as a top 100 keynote speaker. He is the author of 4 books. I have read them all: Beyond Drama, Conflict Without Casualties, Seeing People Through, and his newest book that we're going to talk about today, Compassionate Accountability. There's that phrase again. He hosts a podcast called On Compassion with Dr. Nate, writes a weekly blog, and contributes to multiple industry publications. He's a regular guest on podcasts. And as we're live, this is launch week for this new book. Nate, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's great to be back with you again. It's been a while, been a minute, as they say, and It's wonderful to be here.
I should have said welcome back, because Nate was episode 78 of this podcast I looked it up this morning. I didn't have this in my memory, I promise you, in December of 2017. And now he's back for what will become episode 384. So 300 some episodes later, Nate, you're back. I've been looking forward to this. We've had a couple of chances to chat leading up to this. I've had the book for a while, and we've got someone with us from Ethiopia. So we're glad that you are here. So let's just dive in. So why this book? I'll hold it up again. Why this book, and why now?
Wow. Yes. Well, this wasn't going to be our next book. Actually, about a year ago, a little more than a year ago, my publisher, Barrett Kohler, approached me and said, it's about time we think about a second edition of your previous book, Conflict Without Casualties. It's about time. And so we started working on that and got some reviews and everything. And then we just started getting messages from the universe, you could call it, that compassion was trending. And coming out of COVID, coming out of the pandemic, what we were hearing from our clients, what we were hearing from leaders around the world is, man, we're really struggling to balance the kindness, care, concern, empathy that we really needed to show during COVID, and this whole getting back to work thing, and that we've got to start getting work done. And so we've been working on this book in the background for a long time. And, it just kind of came to us that we've got to shift gears. This book needs to be in the world right now. And so we contacted our publisher and said, hey, stop the press. Literally, can we turn things around? We submitted the proposal. They loved it. And it's the fastest book we've ever written, because we just had all hands on deck, because we wanted to get this message out there right now.
And it's really a good book. I think it's my favorite of your 4, just between you and me, and I guess the universe. You hinted at this a little bit. In the business world, the way we've thought about compassion has changed over time. You talk very early in the book about what you call the evolution of compassion. And I think that's worth giving us all a little context. So why don't we just take a second to talk about what you mean by that and sort of walk us through that? Because I think people are going to
Yeah.
They're going to nod their head, and it's going to be helpful for the rest of our conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm with you there. So compassion is a word we all know. We've all heard of it. I mentioned the book. I grew up son of missionary parents, so the concept of compassion and being compassionate is no. I'm no stranger to that. But when I started getting into professional work in the late '80s, early '90s, the idea of compassion in a corporate setting was still really, really new. And we were
Very
practicing kind of
not,
cutting edge,
I don't really
fringy.
know
Yeah, like
about
kinda
this.
woo-woo medicine, and
You live in
there was
Kansas, not California, after all.
yeah. The compassion was kind of personal practice, maybe mindfulness, meditation. Eastern medicine was starting to come in, mind, body, spirit stuff integration. So, I've been tracking compassion in how we relate to it corporately, and a lot has changed, and I track a couple eras of compassion, but, it has found its way more and more into the corporate space in different ways. And organizations like LinkedIn, Google have really made it a central theme and tried to elevate it. And I think with the DEI, I have one era that I called inclusion compassion, which is we really, when we started talking about DEI and belonging, we can't talk about it without talking about compassion.
Well,
But
and if you try to, then it's not really what it's supposed to be. Then it's just we're checking a box.
right, exactly, exactly. But COVID blew apart everything we thought we knew about compassion. It really tested us, and it forced us to get serious about what we mean when we talk about compassion, and we had to start reconciling some things. And I talk about the pendulum of compassion, where compassion was kind of being thrown around like a rag doll during COVID, and we really were forced to start taking a tough look at what do we mean when we say this. And we're glad it happened, because we've been exploring this word and the practice of real compassion at work for 15 years.
Well, and one of the things that I've said, and I think I've even said it in this podcast, is that one of the things I there are many things that I hope that we don't forget from the pandemic. There's a lot of things people would like to forget, I realize.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of things that we need to take from that and learn from it. And I think one of the things is a lot of leaders stepped up and figured out how to, or allowed themselves to be more empathetic, which is a
Yeah,
piece of compassion.
yeah,
And one of the things that I've said is, man, I hope we don't lose that. I hope we don't forget what we learned. And I think that some haven't forgotten, and I think that's been a. I think we'll look at it 5 years from now and say that's a positive. But your point is, there's some people that sort of swung that pendulum back, and said, but now, like
yeah,
there has to be a but for some reason. Um, but now we have to get work done, not like we didn't get work done during that time, as it turns out. But I think that's kind of, I think, a big part of this book. It's where you sort of start.
yeah,
So I want to get at the phrase compassionate accountability, but before that, one of the many ways that we're in sync and in agreement is about what accountability really is. And
right.
let's just do this. Like, ultimately, what are leaders accountable for in your mind, Nate?
Yeah, well, this is a really important distinction, because the word accountability is popular, and it's also kind of this double-edged thing. People, oh, we gotta have more accountability, gotta hold people accountable. It's also
I
kind of
tell people it's the longest four-letter word in the
yeah,
English language.
exactly, exactly. Then there's also the word responsible, which are related, but they're not the same thing. Responsibility involves what I have direct control over. My thoughts, my feelings, my behaviors. That's all I can be responsible for. But accountability has to do a lot more for who I answer to. Who am I? Who do I have to answer to, and for what? If I'm the CFO, I'm accountable for the financial performance of the organization, but I'm not responsible for individual spending decisions. So I have to answer
You
for it.
can influence, but
I
you
can
can't control.
influence it, but ultimately I'm not the one actually doing these things, but I have to account for it. And I do my job well when I get clear about what I'm responsible for. So accountability really has to do with answering to someone or something for yourself, and for what your scope of responsibility is.
For your behaviors,
Yep.
ultimately, right?
Yep.
So then we've been talking about compassion. Now we brought that word in. And so now, without any further ado, what do you mean when you say then compassionate accountability?
Yes.
Because if accountability is by some is seen as a four-letter word, like
Yeah.
I'm going to hold you accountable, What do you mean by compassionate accountability?
Well, here's the rub. When push comes to shove, every human being, every leader is going to choose either relationships or results. And if you push them hard enough, they will make a choice and they're going to choose one over the other. And it comes from this belief that somehow those two are in opposition, that somehow the traditional definition of compassion is great, but sometimes you have to get things done. Or, you
Yeah,
know,
it's like it's this is binary. Like
yeah,
people
it's
think
like
this is
it's
binary.
binary. So when we hear that, we have been going back to like, well, we must not understand compassion well enough, because if you go to the Latin root of the word compassion, it's actually two things. Com means with, passion means suffer. With suffer. So compassion means to suffer or struggle with other people, not against them, not instead of them, not alone, but with them. And so implied in that definition is this is hard work. And we're doing this as two mutual human beings that are both equal dignity. And so accountability then must have be able to happen within the compassion space, not instead of it or not in opposition. So we put those two words together to emphasize that compassion and accountability are not in opposition. They're not in tension. They're not meant to work against each other. They're actually, compassion includes accountability, and you can't have compassion without it.
Yeah, because otherwise you become codependent, right? Uh,
Absolutely. I
um,
mean, we like to say compassion without accountability gets you nowhere, and accountability without compassion gets you alienated. So you have to have both at the same time if you're going to be an effective leader in today's workplace.
yeah, you open the book with that this idea of that everyone thinks it's binary, right? Content or process, results or relationships, all these sorts of things, and yet the reality is they are together, and in fact they're on a scale. And if we're too far either direction, it's not going
Yeah.
to work. And
Yeah.
you know what? Now we're getting into what I think is my next book is going to be, which is and when we use styles, the problem with styles is they say, well, I'm more results oriented or whatever. And like
Yeah.
that, I think I understand why we have styles. And I think that they are often counterproductive, quite
Yeah.
honestly, because they allow us to say, well, this is my style.
Hey,
Right.
personality is not an entitlement program. It is
Exactly.
not.
Love that.
And
So you're going to
style
write
is,
it. Will you write the forward to my next book?
I would love to. I'd love to. You got that on record. No, it's so true, because some people are like, well, at the end of the day, you just have to get stuff done. It's like, well, that reveals my style,
That,
right?
or,
My
yep.
tendency. But you can have a style, but if you're limited by it, if it becomes your one trick pony, how can you be an effective leader if you can't transcend your style to be more effective?
Because, oh, by the way, you have a whole team of people who are
Yeah.
all amazing, different, and on
Yeah.
certain days messy, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, like, yeah, anyway, we don't need to go down
Yeah.
that road. We need to talk about the idea in the book of the compassion mindset. So I mean, we're kind of getting at it, but we're not
Yeah.
really talking about it directly. So you say that we need to have a mindset that allows us to understand, and I think maybe even accept the ideas you and I have been talking about. So say more
Yeah.
about that, Nate.
To practice full compassion, we need to change our relationship and understanding with it. And that's about mindset. And mindset is an interesting thing, because mindset is not the same as skill set. Skill set is practiced habits. You work, 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 you change behavior, you practice it, you becomes a habit. A mindset is a shift in how you think about something, it's a shift in your attitude, it's a choice you make. And I like to ask people, have you ever heard an amazing speaker like Kevin, or read something, and after you read it, it was like like it changes you instantly. You're not the same after you hear it. That's not about practicing a new behavior. That's about a shift in how you see yourself in the world. So,
And by the way, we can't operate different than how we see the world.
right.
Like, and
Yeah.
so back to what we were saying
Right.
before. Like, if I believe that ultimately I'm responsible for results, then my behaviors
Yeah.
I'm going to practice the skills that match up with that, which will lead to the habits. We like to think mindset, skill
Right.
set, habit set. And until you get all that, right?
And again, under stress, and we work with a lot of leaders under stress when they're trying to learn new things, the mindset will come through. Their behavior will reveal the mindset. So we went way back to basics and said, what is our operational definition of compassion? And so we define compassion. It's the practice of demonstrating that people are valuable, capable, and responsible in every interaction. And that's the foundation for the mindset. So can I break it down real quick
Yeah,
with
so
you?
you call them, well,
Yeah.
yes, well,
Yeah. The three switches are
the
next.
3 switches, that's where I was gonna go next, and it's the 3 switches about
Yeah.
each of those 3. So go ahead and
Yeah.
do that, and even talk about the metaphor, because the metaphor is awesome.
Absolutely. So it's the practice of demonstrating. Compassion is a living, breathing, dynamic relationship between people. So we have to demonstrate the mindset through our behavior. What are we demonstrating? The three realities of human beings. We're valuable, but we're also capable and we're also responsible. We can't just stop at, hey, we're all worthwhile human beings. If that's all you do with your DEI initiatives, you've missed the point completely.
And you're
Because
not gonna and you're
no,
not gonna get what the organization
no,
needs from all
we're
of us as resources in it, right?
we're also capable, which means we bring skills, gifts, perspectives, experience to the table. And then we are also responsible. As human beings, we are responsible for our behaviors. We are accountable to each other for those behaviors because we work in community. So we one of the things we like to do at Next Element is come up with the like Occam's razor. What is the simplest visual metaphor to try to have something come alive? And we identified that really these three concepts of value, capability, and responsibility are like switches. And I have the switches up here. I have to show you my OG switches.
Well, I'm glad
Um,
because I was gonna show the picture, but you've got the
yeah,
answer.
yeah. No, check this out. This is like an actual
Yeah.
switch plate. So we've identified these three switches as decisions or choices we make inside. So the question is, do I view myself and other people as valuable unconditionally? So if I do, then that will show in particular behaviors. There are very specific behaviors that turn on and keep on that switch
So
for my
let's just talk about those a little. I
yeah,
mean, knowing that we're gonna do that for all 3, let's just do that for a
yeah,
second. So, like, as a leader, what behaviors will show that, prove that, operationalize that
yeah.
with our team?
This is one of the hardest ones for most leaders. Value is really manifested through emotional connection, social emotional engagement, vulnerability, being able to create a place where mostly when we talk about psychological safety, we're talking about treating people as unconditionally valuable as humans. So a leader can turn their switch on for other people by acknowledging people's feelings, by saying, I care about how you're doing, not just what you're doing. When an employee comes forward with an anxiety, a concern, a fear, maybe they're worried about something, or they share how they're doing, the leader, to have their value switch on, the leader would say something like, thank you so much for sharing. Man, that must be hard to go through this. Or I'm not going to judge you for how you're experiencing this because it's your experience. In the DEI world, we can have our value switch on for other people without being able to relate what they've been through. I can't relate to many of the things that my colleagues of a marginalized group are going through. But what I can say is your experience is yours and it's valuable and I care about it and I want to hear about it without judging it. But the same
And by the way, let's just stop right there because as leaders, a lot of times we're afraid to ask a question or invite a conversation when we don't think we'll have an answer.
right.
We don't think we'll have some way that we can do something,
Yeah.
say something, whatever. And I often say to leaders, like, people want your attention and your ears
Yeah.
more than your ideas and your advice.
Yeah, and that comes at a different place in the switches. The value switch is about how we connect as human beings. So, one of the best ways leaders can turn on the value switch for themselves is to become vulnerable. I know that's a scary, it's another four-letter word for many leaders, but vulnerability is about saying, look, I don't have all the answers. I'm also human even though I may have this position, this role, this title, it doesn't mean that I don't get scared. It doesn't mean I don't worry. It doesn't mean that I don't care about how I look or that want to be valued as a human also. So when we show our cards, we say that it's okay to do that and we take the first step. And most leaders are afraid that if they get vulnerable, they're going to be perceived as weak, which we know that's not true. Their employees say it's not true. The literature says it's not true.
We don't feel that way about other
No,
people.
we don't
So
feel that way about other people, and so we do an interesting interview where we show the hypocrisy of this, where employees would say, "Gosh, if my leader would do this once, their street cred would go through the roof." And the leader says, "If I do it once, they'll all take advantage of me." And so that's the first step. So we have to turn our own value switch on and say, "I'm worth enough to let people know how I'm really doing." Because if compassion means struggling with, how can people struggle with you if they don't know what you're struggling with?
they can't. There's no
Yeah,
with.
they can't.
There's
So,
no with
and
there,
there's
right?
lots of strategies in the book. There's I think like 8 strategies and there's an assessment and everything. So that's just a little tidbit about how that switch is operationalized in our behavior.
Second switch is capability or
Capability,
people.
because
Yeah.
humans are not just worthwhile, we are agentic beings. We, like I said, we have experiences, skills, gifts, and so capability, when that switch is on, we make the belief, we endorse the belief that everyone is capable of contribution. And so, if that's true, what does that mean? Well, it means we get curious. We invite people to participate. We invest in them. We challenge them with support to learn and grow. We put them in situations where they can perform and where they can deliver, and we teach them and we mentor and we coach. So when the capability switches off, we assume limits. We have, a scarcity mindset, or no, what's the opposite of growth mindset? Would be a fixed mindset.
Yep. Yep.
We say things in early ages like, girls aren't supposed to this, or you're too short to play front row in volleyball, or, no one from our family's ever gone to Harvard. So we have all these limiting statements that say, well, you're not capable. And the research is there's really good research on the capability switch about how people will rise to the level that we believe in them and invest in them.
Pygmalion effect, right?
Yeah.
People will live up or down to our level of belief in them, right?
Yeah.
For sure.
And there's lots of little things. We all know about this whole section, the switch has a lot to do with how we deal with failure and mistakes. Lots of great stuff has been written, but we've kind of consolidated into here and say we keep our capability switch on by how we handle failure and how we handle mistakes and create learning opportunities and growth opportunities without shame.
Third switch,
Responsibility, because humans are
the R
not
word.
just valuable, they're not just capable, they are also responsible for their thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors. No more, no less. That's because we work in community and we need each other. We depend on each other in order to perform. So when the responsibility switches on, here is the fundamental belief is I'm 100% responsible for my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, no more, no less. And so are you. So what happens is then when no matter what happened before, we're 100% responsible for what we do next. And that's really different from when the switch is off. We try to isolate responsibility, pointing fingers, blaming, doing a root cause analysis on our relationship here, you know, and trying to figure out where to point the finger rather than what is my responsibility for what I am going to do next.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So, obviously, we were talking with Dr. Nate Regier, the author of the brand new book. And as we're here live, brand new, Compassionate Accountability. Here it is. How leaders build connection and get results. And, we haven't even used those two words, build connection, get results. We said it early. Is
Yeah.
it relationships, there's results? It's an and. This is everybody. This is an and book. This is not a but book. This is an and book. So, you know, we've been talking about this for us as individuals, and that's clearly true. But what can we be thinking if we're thinking about if we're sort of more at the organizational level and we're in HR,
Yeah.
we're in OD or talent, or we're in the C-suite, or we're just a leader in the trenches, but we're thinking broader than just my
Yeah.
own stuff. Like, how do we start to move some of these ideas into our culture?
Wow, such a great question. And it was very important in this book to bring together the mindset, the individual behaviors, and then then the organizational dynamics. So why don't we start with how about we start with marketing and PR? Because they wake up every day thinking about the brand, the image, the brand of the organization. But the reality is that your brand is a lagging indicator of the quality of your culture. And so you
Thank
can't
you, Bobby Herrera,
yeah,
I do
thank you,
believe.
Bobby. He's amazing. You can't manufacture a brand. You can I don't care what big fancy firm you have doing all your great branding. You know, your new branding and logo that you're going to launch is wonderful, but still the quality of your brand is about your culture. And so what's culture then? Now we're talking about HR, people. We're talking about a whole different part of the organization that thinks about this. Well, the culture is just a sum of your interactions, every single one of them. And now we're back to the definition of compassion is the practice of demonstrating that people are valuable, capable, and responsible in every interaction. So we step back and say, first, let's look at how this definition and this mindset gets activated within a culture, and we identify what it means to set behavioral norms. How do we set normative behaviors? Then we identify 6 different areas of an organization where you could look at it through this lens: mission, vision, values, recruitment and hiring, performance evaluation. I mean, you look at these things, every one of these has its own culture and it contributes to the culture. So, what if we were more intentional and examined it and said, how are we reinforcing the switches through the processes, procedures, habits within our culture?
I would tell all of you, and we're gonna need to shift on, Nate. I told you before
Yeah.
that we could go a long time. But I'm going to just tell everybody. I mentioned at the open of this about our new book, our latest book, which I don't have a copy in front of me, the Long Distance Team. I really think, quite honestly, that people ought to buy and read both this new book, Compassion and Accountability, and the Long Distance Team, because together they really give you all of the building blocks. Or really, what you're doing takes another step in the building blocks of process that we put together to help people think about culture,
Mhm.
whether people are together or whether they're not. And I think together they're a fabulous combination, which is why you and I are going to be together at our virtual LeaderCon in a couple of
Yes.
months. And that's not ready to go, everybody, but trust me, you can go to virtualleadercon.com, and soon you'll be able to see the schedule for that in September. And Nate will be joining me for a very special 2-day event. I wasn't even planning to mention that, but there it was.
I'm so
Um,
glad. Wow.
so there's a whole last piece about what are the barriers, and we talked about, you've hinted at a little bit. We don't really have time to go into them, but if you're sitting here watching or listening and saying with still saying all this sounds really good, Nate. Yeah, but there's a whole piece about the barriers, the challenges, of how people are going to think about this, and answering some of those
Yeah.
real concerns. We don't have time to dive deep, but do you want to say anything about
You know,
those
what I
barriers?
what I would say is this is what we hear a lot from leaders. They're like, "I get it. I wanna do this. I get it. Give me the words. How do I say it?" And so one thing you can be assured when you read this book is there is tons of dialogue,
Yeah.
so many examples of here's a principle, here's what it actually sounds like when you're talking to somebody.
Yeah.
Here's what it sounds like when you're talking to yourself. And the barriers are just, not everybody gets on board with this. I think most people get it. It's like, yeah, yeah, this is a good idea, but. So the barriers are really kind of tackle 5 misconceptions, assumptions, stereotypes that we have about compassion that I'm like, hey, I get it. I'll see. Let's meet you where you are. If this is a problem for you, let's journey together. And each chapter offers kind of a way to move beyond that barrier.
And it's extremely practical and very helpful, and will help even if you're there personally. But if you want to make the move in this direction organizationally, you're going to interact with those barriers
Absolutely.
sooner than later, almost assuredly. Is there something, Nate, that I didn't ask that you wish I would have?
I might just thank you. The last thing I would say is in the appendix, there's an assessment. It's the compassion accountability assessment, and you can assess for yourself, for your leaders in a 360-degree way, for your whole organization, the extent to which each of these 3 switches is turned off or not in your culture. and you can get really behavioral results. We use this. Thanks for showing that. You can use it for yourself. You can download copies of it from our webpage, and we build that in when we do organizational diagnostics and assessments and consulting, so we can guide you on where to focus your efforts and where your strengths and growth zones are.
So, Nate, it's clear, like every other human, you are a whole human and not just a work human. So, what do you do for fun, Nate?
I love to smoke, barbecue and smoke meats. And I have a couple smokers that are getting too dusty since I've been in Europe for the last 3 weeks. So I love to
This is
smoke
another
meat.
thing I did not know about you, and another reason
Yeah.
that I feel connected to you. Just
I
saying.
love to compete on barbecue teams. I love to
Oh,
play with my
wow.
dogs and be outside, and I love to be outside a lot. I live in the Midwest. I love to be outdoors, so that's what I do for fun.
Nice. Favorite meat to smoke?
Pulled pork. I do a good brisket, but pulled pork is what I get the most people salivating over.
All right. We'll get together. I'll do a brisket. You do
I
pulled pork,
like it.
and we'll do. I'm all in. So, what are you reading? I know it's launch week, but what's something you're reading now or have read recently, Nate, that people might be interested to know about?
Oh, well, one of my favorite books and is Brené Brown's Atlas of the Heart. Love that book. I recommend it to everybody. I'm also let's see. I'm getting ready to start the performance paradox, and it has a lot to do with similar concepts from my book and enjoying that a lot. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm on now. And there's about 3 more right underneath it.
I understand. We won't put the camera over here
Yeah.
at what I've got over here. So, thanks for that, everybody. I normally tell the guest ahead of time I'm going to ask that. I forgot to ask Nate, and he did it perfectly because sometimes people are like, I can't remember the name of whatever it is. Where do you want to point people? If people want to learn more about the
Yep,
book,
we'll
more
make
about
it
you, about the
super simple.
organization, where do you want to point them?
Super simple. Compassionateaccountabilitybook.com. Everything's there.
Compassionateaccountabilitybook.com. And then I didn't have that there, but I do have this here. That's the website for
That
the
works
company.
too. We'll have it featured on the front page of our website.
Next-element.com or compassionateaccountabilitybook.com. Take your pick. So, everybody, before we go, I have a question that I like to always ask you. If you've been here before, you know what the question is. It's a question of accountability. Uh, Now what? So, you've got 30 minutes of Nate's wisdom. And if you're like me, you wrote a bunch of notes. And I couldn't even take as many because I'm supposed to be looking at the camera. Um, the notes are fine. What are you going to do? What actions are you going to take? Right? The idea is great. The intention is fine. Until we act, it doesn't really matter. Until we translate the thought into behavior, into action, into trying something, and say, "Yeah, I really do value my team, but maybe I'm not letting them see that as in ways that I should." So then don't just stop there. What am I going to do tomorrow? So this afternoon, whenever. And so obviously one of the things I hope that you do is go get a copy of this brand new book, Compassionate Accountability. But beyond that, what actions are you going to take from what you already got? Because even if you don't get the book, you got tremendous ideas here, but they're only valuable if you take action on them. So Nate, thanks for being here. I've been looking forward to this. This one's been on the calendar for a while. We've been going to have
Yeah.
it on launch week, and so very excited to have had the chance to visit with you.
Thank you. It means a lot. It's great to be with you and with your listeners out there. Really appreciate it.
And I look a little better than the last time you saw me when I was putting together a display at ATD, and
Oh.
you came up behind me, and I was like, "Hi, Nate."
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So anyway, man, it is so good to see you, and it's so good to have all of you here, just like every week. And we'll be back again. You do know that on the podcast every week, as well as also each week another episode of Remarkable TV that we add here for you. But whether you come for the interviews or for the short videos with me or for all of it, we'll be back next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Thanks, everybody.